Come on, Judy, hurry up. Your favourite programme's on in a second.
Desperate Housewives.
Oh, very droll. Come on, come in, it's starting.
Coming up later on WHSmith TV, Richard Madeley, My Life in Musicals. But first...
Hello, I'm Jane Shemilt and I've written Daughter.
And so it begins, another cracker of a series of great books from the Richard and Judy Book Club collection.
There's drama, intrigue, romance, and that's just from us.
A whole host of grade A authors personally selected for your reading delectation.
Not to mention some wit and charm along the way too.
You'll be lucky.
Talking of which, let's begin.
Make your debut with the Richard and Judy Book Club, exclusive to WHSmith.
And what a debut we have for you this week.
We meet the GP turned writer, Jane Shemilt.
Very much wanted to bring a note of authenticity into the book. General practice is a good place to start because, after all, general practice is a place of high drama.
Jane will be busting that myth that GPs have awful writing, because she certainly doesn't, and telling us about how she juggles being a doctor, surgeon's wife and mother of 5 with being a really terrific writer.
The Richard and Judy Book Club, exclusive to WHSmith. Join in the conversation on Facebook, Twitter and right here on the download.
Dorset, 2010, 1 year later. Autumn deepens into winter. In the morning, the silence presses coldly against my face. I listen, though I'm not sure what I'm listening for.
Well, welcome back to the Richard Judy Book Club. We're here now with our autumn list as the nights are drawing in, and I hope you'll have lots and lots and lots of lovely reading time by the fire. And opening our autumn list today is Jane Shemilt. And Jane is a debut writer, a first-time author, and her book is called simply Daughter. And I absolutely loved it. I think it's if you've got teenage children of your own, I would say it is absolutely a compulsive must to read, worrying as it is. Jane, hello. Thank you very much for coming along.
My pleasure.
Now, just to, talk about the book before we talk a little bit about you and your background, but
yes.
Jenny,
Yes.
who is the heroine of your
Yes.
book, she is a GP in Bristol, and she is married to a man who is a neurosurgeon, a prominent neurosurgeon at, is it the Frenchay Hospital in Bristol?
Yes.
Yes, a big Bristol hospital. And between them they have 3 children who are 17-year-old twin boys and a 16-year-old daughter. And on the surface everything seems wonderful. They're very busy, they're very achieving, they've got a beautiful house, and they're not worried about their children. They get on with their children, they think they know them. And Jenny especially thinks she knows her 16-year-old daughter Naomi very, very well. And yet, does she? And that's the whole point of the book, and it makes all mothers, I think, question their relationships with their children.
And fathers, Judy, I was terrified.
And fathers. So just tell us a little bit about the story as it starts with Jenny and Naomi.
Well, the story, the very beginning of the story, takes us a year on from the main events, where we see Jenny alone. And at that point we wonder, because her life is empty. All her certainties have been stripped away and her previously gilded life has effectively unravelled. The story then goes back to the beginning, where there she is at the centre of a very busy, successful life, where, in a sense, everything she has, this wonderfully privileged lifestyle for which she and her husband have worked hard, is, if you like, taken for granted. And like many busy mothers, she's managing a lot. And she's so busy that she doesn't really realise that everybody around her are keeping secrets.
Including Naomi.
Including Naomi.
Who she thinks she's very close to, and
Yes.
thinks is close to her, and they have a good two-way bilateral relationship, and whatever difficulties there are, just the normal bits and bobs in the flotsam and jetsam of adolescence. But of course it's much, much darker than that.
Yes.
It all seems, it's a wonderfully told story, and it all seems to start unravelling at the time of the Christmas school play. Naomi has an important part in that, doesn't she?
Yes.
She's out a lot, rehearsing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that can happen. We trust our teenagers to have separate lives, and it's that question of boundaries, which I think comes up for a lot of parents, is how much freedom, how much do you need to be there?
And how carefully and adroitly do you read possible warning signs, which may not be warning signs? There's a very important sequence early on when Naomi comes home with, I mean, some extremely sort of full-on bondage-type footwear.
Yes.
And And her mother has to work out whether to be worried about this.
Yes.
But in fact, it's a very important sign, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I think that's the thing. There are signs which later Jenny will think about very carefully.
With hindsight. Yeah.
With hindsight. And that is the reason for the structure of the book, in a way, because it allows the exploration deeply of these little signs that at the time she doesn't really notice.
Well, I'm glad that we read the book after our daughter. We had one daughter had gone through adolescence and she's now safely ashore, you know, in her 20s. Because had I read it when she was 15, 16, I would have been second guessing everything, you know. Because of course what happens is Naomi vanishes. She just doesn't come home one night and just vanishes into thin air.
I think that's the thing. In the story, I wanted to play with the primal fear that we all have as parents, which is what would happen if the worst happened, and how would I cope, and what would I do? And I think that is one of my greatest fears, and I know it's a lot of people's fears, and so I found that was a way of driving the story, which is also about loss and grief, something that fascinated me as a GP as well.
Yes, and what happens as the construction of the story is that you keep going back to the days before it happened.
Yes.
In other words, the days before Naomi's inexplicable disappearance.
Yes.
And the 6 months later, a year later, so and so, by which time the entire family has fractured. And as you say, Jenny is alone. She's living in a cottage in Dorset, and she's estranged from her husband. I was very interested in the relationship with Ted, her husband, because at the beginning, as we realised that actually Jenny thinks that in some ways she's better at having a family than Ted does. She's very, very busy and he's very, very busy, but she thinks she's the one, isn't she?
Yes.
Who really relates to the children in a way that he doesn't.
He's
quite distant.
Yes.
And yet, actually, as we find out throughout the book, Ted knows far more about what's going on than Jenny does.
Yes.
And do you think that's a kind of, in two very busy professional people, a professional couple, do you think that's a common thing, that the woman feels somehow it's down to her to be more in tune with the kids, but actually she's not always succeeding and her husband's doing slightly better?
Yes, I think that's a very interesting take on the book, and I think that does actually happen. I think if two people are very, very busy, they're not always in tune with each other, and I think it's very easy for the woman whose default position is to cope with everything, to forget actually that the man also has a very valid relationship with the children that may take it in some senses more deeply.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And why in the book then does he not bring his wife up to speed, as it were, with the information that he has, and he realises from the way she behaves and what she says she doesn't? He knows things that she doesn't. Why doesn't he tell her?
Well,
I think he feels that it's gone on to it's too late, really.
yeah.
I think he's burdened with his own guilt.
Yes.
Without wanting to give too much
Yes.
away,
No, absolutely, yes,
he has layers of another life,
Yes.
Yeah.
in a sense.
Yeah.
And so, and he's also promised his daughter that he will keep secrets.
Right. Now, they do say, particularly about first-time writers, that one should write about what you know. And there's a lot of parallels. I'm not on the tragic sense, but there's a lot of parallels between your private life and the one that you describe in the book, aren't there?
You're right. I was very much wanted to bring a note of authenticity into the book. And I felt that general practice is a good place to start, because after all, general practice is a place of high drama as well as routine, and that as a GP, your job is very much to be a listener. And as a writer, you're a listener too. And so I found myself listening to very unique stories. And
Did you keep a notebook as a GP? Did you drop things down that you thought might come in useful as a writer?
Well, really, what I began to realise was that beyond the unique stories, there was a shared narrative that was coming out, which was a narrative of loss. And beyond that, there was a story of resilience and what happens after the loss. And I remember one day looking at a patient and thinking, how are you coping with this, really? Because patients lose so much. Everybody comes with a story of loss, whether it's small, whether it's big, whether it's life-changing, or just the changes that happen with old age, whether it's depression, what happens after mastectomy. So many people carry loss and carry on. And that was something that I wanted to explore. So I brought that very definitely into my book.
And did your experience as a GP, or experiences as a GP over all that time, I'm not saying it inures you to human suffering, because it doesn't, clearly.
No.
But it must give you a sense of perspective, which perhaps other people in narrower professions can't have.
I don't know. I think that because everybody's got a different story and everybody's so different, I think it's very important to bring a freshness of response to different patients, because after all, you may have heard the story of what happens after a heart attack or what happens when you're mad down in depression. As a GP, you may have had that many times, but for the patient, that's the only time they're going to feel like that, perhaps. So I think it's really important to bring your response to them as though it's the first time too.
Well, I find it hard to imagine how you could have written this story without the experiences which you describe in your real life. It's absolutely captivating as a story. It completely sucks you in, particularly, as Judy said, if you are a parent yourself, although you don't have to be. I'm sure our daughter would love reading this. And
well, you see in it, I think, as Jane has made clear, I mean, you see so much of what seem to be the normal, ordinary events of daily family life, and what you don't, and what this book makes you see is what's possibly running underneath them and what it could lead to. It's a lovely book. I really enjoyed it.
I have to say, I found the ending very satisfying. Unexpected, actually. It wasn't what I was expecting to happen at all, but it left me very satisfied as a story reader. Anyway, here it is. It's our first book of the autumn. We know you'll enjoy it. I'm not going to say hope. We know you will. It's called Daughter. And if you do buy it from WHSmith's, our partners in the Richard and Judy Book Club, then only from WHSmith do you get copies which have all the extra content in the back. That's things like our question and answer sessions that we give to the authors that go way beyond what we discuss here. All sorts of other stuff, but only if you get it from the store, WHSmith. Anyway, we've just got started. 7 to go.
On the mat already is a postcard of a Welsh mountain from Ted's vast collection, his way of keeping in touch. No message as usual. My routine varies a little. When I begin to write, when I have a new story to write, really it's a matter of showing up and grinding out the words. And I'm pleased then if I do even a few hundred words a day, because that's the tricky part and you need lots of time to think as well. So I try to keep the morning, I try to use my morning brain. Later, as the book evolves and as deadlines loom, I find myself really writing all day and resenting even the time to stop for lunch. I run the dog round the block and I'm still writing at midnight. I sit at the kitchen table and my heart slows. The sketchbook is in front of me. I pull it towards me and open it at the next page. When the police came to the door and I saw the black and white, the padded jackets and the badges, her absence became official. It was still dark, but it must have been towards morning, maybe 4 or 5 a.m. The pencil is rough in my fingers. I can feel the chips where it's been bitten as I draw a little hooded top, shading between the folds with short grey lines.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was an extremely intelligent and thoughtful, but also entertaining look at what goes on in a family, a professional middle-class family, and they are successful in every single aspect of their life, but they don't know, and they think they're being successful with the way they bring up their teenage children. What they don't know is they don't know anything about them.
That's what I think's so clever about the way she's written the story. The thing is, as we know, as parents of adolescent kids, you have to kid yourself that you know what's going on, that you know pretty much what they do in their private life, what they're thinking. You think you can sort of second guess them, and whatever they do that surprises you is because you were kind of wise and benevolent enough to let them off the leash and make their own mistakes. And it's all a pretense. We haven't got a clue really what's going on. Once they get past 14, 15, into 16, they're completely private people, and you only know what they allow you to see. And I think that's what she's very cleverly observed, not just obviously with her own family, but in those of her patients and her friends. And it's a kind of universal truth. There are very few teenagers who are truly open with their parents. And that being the case, it allows her to develop this extremely dark and very surprising storyline for the girl.
Yeah, but also, I mean, she makes the point that it's a particular kind of parent, the busiest, apparently most successful parent, with enormously complex demands in their own professional lives, who tend to miss what's going on at home.
Yep.
So that you think as a really successful professional woman, and a successful professional husband, that you've got everything. But everybody has to take their eye off the ball sometime, and that what the ball they've taken their eyes off is their kids, especially Naomi.
And I must say, I thought possibly this didn't come out very strongly in the interview we did. It's a damn good thriller, because this girl disappears quite early on, and she disappears without a trace. I mean, there is not a shred of anything left behind to indicate what might have happened to her, whether she's been taken, whether she's gone. Where is she? Is she anywhere? And that central sort of throbbing question mark runs right the way through to the end of the book, when, of course, you have your discovery. And it's funny, I mean, you and I have a slightly differing view of the way the book ends. I personally found it very surprising. It was not what I expected at all, but I quite liked it. I found it quite satisfying.
Well, I think as a mother I didn't find it satisfying.
No.
I would have liked it all to be happy ever after. But it's not an unhappy ending. It's just a slightly unresolved ending. And
unexpected.
And unexpected. Next on the book club, it's Groundhog Day for Harry August.
I tried to speak, but the words tumbled together on my tongue and I said nothing. The world is ending, she said.
We look at the first 15 lives of Harry August with author Claire North.
It's been a long time since my first novel was accepted. I remember being shocked and very surprised and very scared.
That's coming up next on the Richard and Judy Book Club, exclusive to WHSmith.
I was only 14 years old, and I remember sitting on the stairs in my house, my parents standing there going, "Are you sure? Are you sure it's not a mistake? Really? Are you sure?"
Settle down with a great book this autumn. Check out the Richard and Judy Book Club reads in store and online now, whsmith.co.uk/Richard and Judy. And don't forget you can download each and every book via Kobo for your e-reader or your smartphone via the free Kobo app.